Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Friday, everybody. It's good to be back. Yeah, it's Friday. It's always good to be back on a Friday. It's always good to stream on a Friday. We miss Friday streams sometimes through no fault of my own. Look, I told y'all that I would keep my Fridays loose and that I would cancel if I wanted to. I could cancel out of whim. I could cancel right now, but I won't. I won't because we're finally getting into part 4, The Age of Charlemagne. And I'm very excited because I like Charlemagne a lot. I have a lot of books. I have a lot of books about Charlemagne. I have several. I have like 9, 8 or 9, which is more than enough. It's not enough. Never mind. It's not enough. It's never enough. But we're finally in the Age of Charlemagne. It's about time. It's taken 16 episodes. It's taken 16 streams to get here. Technically, actually, it took 17. This is the 17th, but it took 17 because there was that one that I just cut short before we even read anything. But episode 17, I guess we call them episodes. That's what I listed as. It's as an episode. But we're finally in Charlemagne, episode 17. Enough said. The last section we read was about Islam, and it was terrible. It was awful. I've never heard someone talk so highly of a civilization than Henry Moss talking about Islam. You'd think they were the only civilization at the time, the way he talks about them. But now we're reading about the actual greatest civilization of all time, which is Charlemagne, the Frankish Empire, and the Holy Roman Empire, also known as Western Christian civilization. So I'm excited to get into it. It's going to be fun. Hopefully he doesn't mess it up. But I read a little bit ahead, and we're gonna take a pretty quick we're gonna take a detour pretty quickly into this. I'm gonna pat myself on the back a little bit. We're gonna read through one of my tweets, kind of a self promo, get y'all to follow the Twitter because I post things there every once in a while. Not nearly as often as I should, but I do post things there. We'll get into that. But we're getting pretty close. I think we only have about 80 pages left. I think. No, we have about 90. We have 100. Yep. We have 96. No, 90. 3. I'm terrible at math. We have a little over 90 pages left to get through. If we're reading about, 10, 15 pages a day, it's 30, 60, 90. 3 weeks, maybe 6 streams, 7 streams probably. 6, 7 streams. But again, some of these pages are shorter. Some of them are just pictures or like this, a map. So we'll get through it in good time. And then we will get into the next book, which I have not decided yet. I was talking with my mom about what I might read next, and she did not like any of my suggestions. Because one of them, I made a post about it on YouTube where it was the economics of European civilization There was actually 2 books that had something to do with economics. The Economic and Social Foundations of European Civilization by Alphonse Dobsch, an Austrian author, and The Economic Life of the Ancient World by Jules Toutain, a French author, obviously. But there's also Ottonian Germany by David Warner, which is a translation of several older... The Chronicon of Theitmar of Mersburg. This guy, Theitmar, or Theitmar or whatever, he was a chronicler of the time period, and he put together a lot of different sources. So there's several different books that he basically put together from this time period, which would be about the 1000s. So I'm looking at that one. That one could be interesting. There's also a book I found by Luitprand, who was a chronicler of that time period as well. He was a peer of Saint Henry II of the Holy Roman Empire. And he wrote about Otto I, who is kind of the... There's a debate about whether Charlemagne was the founder of the Holy Roman Empire or Otto I. So that's what this book would be about, or Luitprand's book would be about. Whereas the 2 economic books would just be kind of a general overview of time. From, I think the first one I was looking at starts in Europe in like the 500 BCs and just goes throughout, keeps going until, I don't know, modern time, or I don't think it's modern time, but that one looks interesting. That's the one I'm leaning towards, but I don't know. I don't know if I should. I might continue with the book on Otto. But we might find a little article just to kind of explain the time period in between, because we would be jumping from the year 814 to about to the late 900s if we went to Otto. Yeah, let me try to find a date. Otto. Let me try to find a date for King Otto. Otto the First, 936 to 973. Yeah, so mid to late 900s. So there's a good 100 years of time that's not accounted for. So if we were to do that, we would find some supplemental reading to help fill in the space. But we'll get there when we get there. I'll make a decision at some point, and I will not consult any of you. You're all great people who watch me, all 3 of you. But I will not consult you on what we're reading. But speaking of what we're reading, let's get into it. Part 4, The Age of Charlemagne, Chapter 11, The European Background, Section 1, The Anglo-Saxon Invasions. Oh yeah, this is another thing I noticed when I was kind of skim reading this chapter, 10 minutes ago. He's adding section breaks now. He's adding actual subsections. I don't know why he decided to do that on the last part of the book, because he didn't do that at all. Actually, I think he did it in like chapter 1. He might have done it in chapter 1 and then just didn't do it for the rest of the book until now. Moss just makes some very odd editorial decisions And I don't understand any of them. I don't think he likes the word "and." I think he has an animosity towards it that I don't understand. But let's get into it. The Anglo-Saxon invasions. There is an almost complete absence of written records for the history of these islands between AD 400 and 550. Darkness hangs over them and the mists of the Arthurian legend. In recent years, the regional study of place names, the excavation of dwellings, cemeteries, boundary and defensive earthworks, air survey, and the efforts to re-establish reliable criteria for the dating of pottery, coins, and metalwork have accumulated material for a reconstruction of the course taken by various bands of invaders, the nature of their settlement, and the fate of the Romano-British population. A synthesis of such results may eventually enable some picture to be formed of these dim centuries. In the meantime, certain controlling factors may be noticed. They act as if the legend of King Arthur is a legend and not something that actually happened. But this is where I said we're going to take a very quick detour very shortly into this section. And we're going to do some self-promotion. This is a Roman villa, the Villa of Chedworth. It was an archaeological discovery in 1864. And I just kind of wanted to read through it, give y'all an idea of some of the archaeological stuff going on in England, of what he's talking about. So the Roman villa of Chedworth was found on accident in 1864 by Thomas Margetts, a gamekeeper who was hunting for ferrets. By the way, all of this just comes from Wikipedia. If you want to read a more coherent article about it, look up the Villa of Chedworth on Wikipedia. That's just where I got all this information. He found a piece of one of the mosaic floors. The site was excavated soon after. The buildings seen below are the visitor center. The stone walls are the villa. That's this section right here. You have some of this area right here. Built in phases between the 2nd and 5th century, it started 120 or so AD as a typical working farm and later became the villa of a local elite. It consisted of separate buildings around, quote, of separate buildings around 3 sides of a rectangle, open to the east with a bathhouse to the north. In the 3rd century, the west and south wings were rebuilt after they were destroyed in a fire. During this time, the north bath was also enlarged. I'm not sure what this is. These were just pictures of it. I'm not sure exactly what all of this is that I'm showing you, all of these pictures, but in the 4th century, it received the largest renovations. The villa was enclosed in a courtyard and the existing wings connected via porticos. An inner garden and outer courtyard were also added. Mosaics were added to the dining room. This is one of the mosaics in it. Very old mosaic. The north half of the west wing was converted into a second bath, a damp heat bath. The original bath was modified into a dry heat bath. These are more kind of like saunas, I would imagine. In the late 4th century, another dining room was added to the north wing. More mosaics and walls are added during the 5th century. This is a significant discovery as Rome was no longer in control of Britain at this time. It shows that Roman civilization continued there despite nominally being separated. And here's just some more of the Roman mosaic floor. Crazy. It still has such a beautiful coloring. Obviously, you can tell it's been dulled. The color's been dulled, but you can tell that these were vibrant and beautifully colored floors and walls. But just a little look into an old Roman villa in England. And this, this is, the walls are added during the 5th century. Rome is, like I had said, I don't think this was a quote from, no, this was still a quote from the Wikipedia page. It's been a while. This is in March I made this post. But yeah, it shows you that even though Rome was nominally not in control of England anymore, it's still, the influence of Rome was still there. And actually, that time period, it's the 400s that Rome kind of is kicked out. Not necessarily kicked out, but is not in England anymore, in the British Isles. This is the time period that Constantine III, he was a common foot soldier in England, and he ends up becoming co-emperor with Honorius. And he leads an army into France, and he's eventually killed by Honorius. But he wages war with the Western Roman Empire at the time of about 408. But very quick detour right at the beginning. We might take some more of them. I've been slacking on my map game. I haven't been bringing in enough maps. But I don't know how many opportunities I'll have for that. If I see them, I will take them. But let's get back into it. The coastline of England has altered considerably since early medieval days. Footnote: see the Ordnance Survey maps of Roman Britain and Britain in the Dark Ages. Ugh. He uses Dark Ages, so you already know he's cooked. The east and south coast, from the Firth of Forth to the Isle of Wight, presented at that time alternate stretches of cliffs and tidal marshes. The cliffs were easily defensible, only the gaps formed by river mouths required to be guarded, and the remains of late Roman signal stations and coast forests show how this was effected. The marshy inlets, on the other hand, lay open to the boats of the invaders, with their shallow draft. The Humber estuary, stretching far inland, formed a huge waterlogged region, and similar conditions were repeated on a larger scale round the Wash, where the fen country extended as far as Stamford and Cambridge. For the plundering raider, the stagnant channels would float his vessel into the heart of the land, and on many an island in the swamps he could form camps in which to rest from fighting and collect his booty undisturbed. From Williamson, The Evolution of England. Let's see. We have Norfolk and Suffolk. Let's see if we can get a better idea of what he was talking about. Here's the Wash. I mentioned that. Humber. Where's the Isle of Wight, I believe, is... Where's the Isle of Wight? Here's the Isle of Wight. So this is the Fort of Firth. Where's the... Where's the Fort of Firth? Is it this? Just the entrance to London? I'm not sure. But this is Anglo-Saxon England. Inland conditions show an even more striking picture. Drainage and deforestation have altered the face of the countryside, for in Roman and Saxon times a large part of England was covered by dense woodland, while the valleys were frequently in impenetrable morass. The history of the early settlements and of the formation of the Saxon kingdoms was thus largely determined by geography. The Humber estuary, continued by marshes, was joined on the west by the forest of Elmet, which stretched to the slopes of the Pennine Hills, estuary, swamp, and forest forming in this way a barrier to communications between Midlands and North. The Fen district cut off East Anglia from the Midlands, just as the great forest belt extending southwest to the fens in Epping isolated Essex and forbade westward expansion. The greatest forest of all, the Andreswald, Andred Swald, Swald. I'm going to go with the German pronunciation. Andreswald covered a broad tract stretching practically from Winchester to Hastings, leaving only a strip of a few miles in breadth where the South Downs run parallel to the sea. Even as late as the 18th century, when the Weald had been largely cleared, the Sussex coast was difficult of access from London during the greater part of the year. Farther west, the forest belt, of which Cranbourne Chase still remains, barred the way to West Dorset and South Somerset for the invaders proceeding northwards from Southampton Water. When this prevalence of swamp and forest is borne in mind, the significance of such earthworks as Bokerley Dyke, protecting the Romano-British settlements of Cranbourne Chase, becomes apparent. Though now only a few miles of rampart set in open country, in those days it guarded the narrow entrance to a district elsewhere defended by natural obstacles. The fortunes of the various kingdoms are explicable largely by their situation. Sussex, Kent, Essex, and East Anglia were doomed by political insignificance, since further expansion was denied them. Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex, on the other hand, were able to extend their territory at the expense of the Romano-Britons, gaining not only in size but in variety of culture and population, and thus each successively emerged as the strongest units of England during the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries respectively. Wessex alone, whose hegemony. This is a word that always trips me up. Hegemony. Wessex alone, whose hegemony lies beyond the borders of this book, achieved real political supremacy. Northumbria, though it included at its full power East Scotland below the Forth, and northern England as far as the Ribble and Yorkshire Ouse, was torn internally by the struggles of Bernicia and Daria, and its Christian kings were more than once successfully challenged by the pagan leaders of Mercia. Its decline, which had set in strongly during the 8th century, was further hastened by the ravages of the Northmen. Mercia from the first was a mixed state, a conglomeration of warbands and adventurers of varied origin, occupying the large debatable territory of the Western Midlands, which must, in the early years of the invasions, have witnessed a fusion of Celt and Saxon, a compromise of two cultures. Controlled from the geographical center of England, at Tamworth on the Walting Street by ruthless and able chieftains, it bid fair at one point to establish a triple division of England for future ages, with Tamworth possibly and Lichfield as the Midland capital and archbishopric. Its sway extended at intervals over the peak dwellers in the north, the peoples of Cheshire and South Lancashire, and the Worcestershire. That word will never be pronounceable. The Worcestershire Hwickas in the south, while the long frontier which separated the Wrekin dwellers from the Welsh kingdoms was perpetuated in Offa's Dyke, the work of Mercia's most famous ruler, the correspondent of Charlemagne, and the most important figure in England at the close of the 8th century. The British Isles have the stupidest names. Tamworth, Lichfield. I felt like I was speaking gibberish half of that. Oh, they're not, I guess. Yeah, they're pretty, some stupid names. Yeesh. Although I shouldn't complain, because we read a lot stupider names in the last chapters. At least these are, for the most part, pronounceable. Have you tried pronouncing Arab names? The weirdest names. the weirdest looking names and sounding names. Almost as weird as like Slavic or Polish names. Do you know that William McKinley was actually murdered by a Polish guy? Solga or Kolzga? His name is spelled like CZOLZ something. Let's see. Kolgosh. Kolgosh, yeah. Leon Kolgosh. This guy. He was the guy who murdered the great president, William McKinley. And I say great president, and I mean it, because McKinley was awesome. Kolgosh. When I looked it up earlier, I seem to remember that's how it was pronounced. Kolgosh. Yeah, he was influenced by Emma Goldman. Yeah. You wonder what her nationality was? Yeah. Emma Goldman, members of the Liberty Club, and then he became a socialist, and he blamed all of his problems on McKinley, even though McKinley would have fixed all of this guy's issues. Because McKinley was a great president. He was a great guy. But this loser shot him. And who did we get? Teddy Roosevelt. We could have had the greatest country on earth. We did have the greatest country on earth. But instead we got national forests. Wow. That's awesome. I like McKinley. I don't know enough about Roosevelt to really dislike him, but I think he is an overrated president. Everyone loves the national parks. I think they're good to some degree, but when the majority of our country is uninhabitable per government decree, I find that ridiculous. We have a wealth of resources that we could use to our benefit. But the government said, no, those trees look pretty. We can't cut them down. We can't cut those trees down. No, we can't cut trees down. That would like hurt trees. Yeah, I know you can plant trees back, but we can't cut down trees. Nah, we'll let Canada cut down trees for us. And we'll just buy trees from Canada. It's like, okay, cool. Awesome. Loved it. Love to see it. I have gripes with the national park system. I love nature, and I think there are some areas that are very naturally beautiful and should be protected to some degree. But I also think we could just make them better. Like, look at Mount Rushmore. Yeah, it's a nice looking rock, but what if we carve Caesar's face into it? What if we carve America's Caesar into the rock? George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. What if we carve the greatest leaders of the nation into this rock? It makes it better. It's awesome. Mount Rushmore is awesome. I love Mount Rushmore. We should do more of it. We need to carve McKinley's face into Yellowstone. We need a new Mount Rushmore in Yellowstone. Those rocks aren't good looking enough. They need to be better. But we're off topic. We're slightly off topic. The passing of Roman Britain still remains one of the great historical mysteries. Fuller knowledge, it may be conjectured, might tend to lessen the importance of actual dates, whether 407 or 440 for the cessation of Roman rule in this island. It is possible that Stilicho's reorganization of the coast defenses towards the close of the 4th century represents the last serious effort made by the empire to retain its outlying province, and parallel conditions in Gaul show that the transition to barbarian rule was not a single episode but a gradual process. The slow weakening of the central government, on the other hand, had resulted in widespread internal disorder and confusion, causing landowners and local officials to arm their retainers in self-defense, and the population to forsake the countryside and seek refuge in the walled towns, while on the other, the first onslaughts of the barbarians were usually succeeded by a period of more or less peaceful infiltration. There is evidence of similar conditions in Britain. Since AD 250, the coasts had been exposed to ravages on east and west from Saxon and Irish pirates, and the German invasions of the 5th century were only a culmination of such raids, followed subsequently by immigration of families. Signs, too, are not wanting of a certain slowing down of Roman civilization in this island, beginning as early as the 3rd century. The technique of building deteriorates, even in the lowland, more fully Romanized districts. A growing sense of insecurity is shown by the fortifications of towns, while the lofty stone castles of the Saxon shore, with their strikingly medieval aspect, emphasize the dangers always present to the coast dwellers. A deadly blow was struck at the fabric of Romano-British life by the Great Raid of 367, when a mixed force of Picts, Irish, and Saxons swept through the entire country, laying waste the manor houses and inflicting irreparable damage on the agricultural system of Britain. A trail of burnt villas marks their path, and the permanent effects of the invasion are shown by the facts that coin hoards discovered on isolated Roman sites show marked diminution in value after this time. That's a new word for me. I really need. I've said for the past like 10 streams that I'm gonna install a dictionary plugin for this program, and I still have not. Diminution. Yeah, that's a pretty phonetic. The actor process of diminishing. Yeah, it's a pretty obvious definition, but I was hesitant about the pronunciation. Should we just take the time right now and just look for a plugin, a dictionary plugin, see if they have one? I don't see why not. Dictionary. Sure, why not? Let's see if it works. Probably not. Dictionary. I think I would have to find one specifically for PDFs. Local dictionary folder. I would have to actually look into it and figure out how to use it, because sometimes these can be a little complicated. Yeah, I'd have to look into it. We'll do that later. Once I in stream, I will look into a dictionary for Obsidian, specifically for PDFs. Not making promises, because I just might not do it. The next 100 years must have witnessed a steady, if intermittent, decline in the civilization of the island. The villas are abandoned, though most of the fortified towns doubtless continued in some form well into the 5th century. In the country districts, the earthworks and hilltop camps of pre-Roman days once again form a refuge for the population. Under pressure of foreign raids and internal strife, local leaders arise, as in other parts of the empire, and the barbarian invaders experience here and there a temporary setback to their advance. The analogy with continental conditions, however, cannot be pressed. The Anglo-Saxons were a people markedly different from the German tribes, whose contact with Rome during 4 centuries, along the whole length of the Rhine and Danube frontiers, had deeply influenced their ideas and even their language. Nor could Britain, devastated and disorganized, present to the newcomers the impressive monuments, the indestructible texture of civilized life, which they encountered in southern France or North Italy. The Saxon leaders were incapable of the admiration of an Alaric or a Theodoric for Roman institutions, the shrewd compromises of Clovis, or the city life of the Lombard dukes. Shreds of scattered evidence hint doubtfully at their reactions to the ruined arches and columns of Roman buildings. They suggest a mixture of superstitious fear and distaste, coupled with an uneasy humor. Ghosts of dead men or powers even more mysterious lurked there, as in the stone chambers and earthen barrows of an older age, and the new Saxon settlements habitually shunned Roman sites. The whole impression is that of settlers entering a derelict and largely depopulated country, and this is borne out of the evidence for the eastern and southern countries of England, where Celtic place names, religion, and customs seem to have largely disappeared by the end of the 6th century. Enclaves of Welshmen, it is true, existed even here, in marsh or woodland, spared or undiscovered by the conquerors, and in Mercia, Northumbria, and Wessex, the former inhabitants had gradually come to terms with the westward spreading invaders, although, as with Gallo-Roman under Frankish rule, the Wehrgild of the Briton was less than that of the lowliest Free Saxon. There is reason, moreover, to think that the skill of the Romano-British craftsmen in Kent and elsewhere was not entirely lost during and after the turmoil of invasion. Continental parallels present themselves again when the subsequent evolution of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms is considered. Familiarity with Roman administrative methods had fostered the growth of absolutism among the rulers of German tribes settled within the empire, and encouraged the development of written law. In this island, Rome's office was performed by the Church, whose influence in molding Anglo-Saxon institutions was more powerful than any other. A Kentish legal code, for example, appears shortly after the arrival of Augustine, and the authority of every successful Saxon king was buttressed by the counsel and cooperation of his ecclesiastics, who realized that a strong central government was essential to the interests of the Church. Contact with the European mainland, and so with the mainstream of civilization, was maintained largely by churchmen, trade and diplomacy at the state being of small importance, while in the growth of feudal elements, such as increased local jurisdiction and immunity from public burdens, the great monasteries, as landed beneficiaries of royal piety, played no inconsiderable part. Let's see. Contact was maintained by the churchmen, trade and diplomacy being small importance. The growth of feudal elements. Yeah, this is every once in a while. Actually, it's pretty often that a sentence. I'll read a sentence, and it'll take me 2 times reading through it to understand what he's talking about, just because he words it weirdly. Now, my reading comprehension isn't exactly top tier, but I question why he phrases sentences in certain ways. Make it more flowery, make it, more unique. Like, this is fun. Contact with the European mainland, and so with the mainstream of civilization, was maintained largely by churchmen, trade and diplomacy at the state being of small importance. And then this is where it kind of goes off the rails for me. While in the growth of feudal elements, such as increased local jurisdiction and immunity from public burdens, the great monasteries, as landed beneficiaries of royal piety, played no inconsiderable part. Okay, never mind. It makes sense. I'm just retarded. He just... Very long sentences. Long sentences are difficult for me. I'm sorry. I need a dunce cap. Yeah, no, that sentence, ignore me. That sentence makes perfect sense. Yeah. Anyway, from a European point of view, undoubtedly the most striking aspect of the Anglo-Saxon conquest is the sudden rise of Northumbria to supremacy, brief but undoubted, in the world of Western culture. Britain, under the Romans, had always remained a frontier outpost of the empire, a backward and unevenly civilized province in comparison with Gaul, Spain, and Africa. From 400 onwards, connection with the center is lost, and the island gradually fades from the consciousness of Rome and Byzantium. Augustine's mission in 597 restored the links with the continent, and the reunion of Celtic scholarship with the original tradition of Western learning produced the Northumbrian Renaissance of art and letters. It also caused the Celtic monks to migrate over to France and thus start the great monastic orders in France, which would later be influenced by Saint Benedict and his rule. Now, there were Irish monks who were there, who were in France beforehand, but Augustine's mission kind of really sets it off. And obviously, Augustine is sent by St. Gregory the Great. St. Gregory the Great is a disciple of St. Benedict, so there's a large Benedictine influence with the apostolate of the church in England. Everything good comes from the Benedictines. And everything good that comes from the Benedictines comes from the church. Because the Benedictines are part of it. Yeah. Obviously. Western civilization was built by Benedictine monks, and we owe them everything. But it was maintained by Franciscans, Dominicans, and Jesuits. It was defended by Jesuits, I guess you could say. Because it was the Jesuits who did the apostolate against the Protestants in England and in Germany. The Dominicans, obviously, some of the greatest theologians. Well, yeah, most of the great theologians of the church who aren't obviously the church fathers come from the Dominican orders. St. Thomas Aquinas, obviously, is the biggest example, but St. Dominic himself was a great theologian. Let's see. Here we are. Never before or since has England occupied a similar position in the world's civilization. Even Rome was obliged to send for manuscripts to the Northern Kingdom, and Bede stands out, without possible rival, as the foremost scholar of the West, supreme in every branch of learning, and in sheer intellectual force towering above the age in which he lived. That's Bede the Venerable. I believe he's a saint. Pretty sure he's a saint. Yeah, I type in Saint Bede the Venerable and church mass times shows up. Saint Bede the Venerable Church. So, yeah, he's it's in California, by the way, if you were wondering. In the town of La Cañada, Flint Ridge, California. Yes. Great Catholic saint. I should read some Bede. I haven't read anything by him. The political decline of Northumbria in face of the growing Mercian power sapped the economic foundations of this brilliant culture, and the remnants of it perished during the Viking raids. But when sorry. And the remnants of it perished during the Viking raids when the great monasteries were sacked and burnt. Yeah, I know the name. I don't know of anything that he's ever written. Saint Bede, that is. I don't know if he was. I assume he was a theologian, but yeah, I just don't know anything by him. Might be an interesting topic to look into. But where was I? Yeah, let's just start back up here. I need to get better about not restarting in the middle of sentences. The political decline of Northumbria in face of the growing Mercian power sapped the economic foundations of this brilliant culture, and the remnants of it perished during the Viking raids, when the great monasteries were sacked and burnt. But Alcuin and his fellows had already carried its inspiration to Aix and Tours, where it formed the basis of the Carolingian revival. That's also known as Aachen, Charlemagne's seat of power. The debt was repaid in part towards the end of the 9th century, after the Danish terror had passed, when continental influences helped to enrich the great Winchester school of painting and draftsmanship in the capital of the flourishing kingdom of Wessex. Rhineland models seem also to have inspired the later Saxon architecture, though the unbroken insular tradition could challenge comparison with other varieties of Romanesque. The stately cathedrals of Durham and Winchester have vanished. The witness of a few village churches, eked out by meager documentary evidence, is all that remains to us of the splendors of the later Anglo-Saxon achievement. It is sufficient, however, when taken in conjunction with the extant examples of Saxon sculpture and of the lesser arts practiced in England at this time, to evoke some regret for the effacement of native methods before the magnificent, though often stereotyped, productions of the Norman builder. The productions of the Norman builder would probably be Gothic. It would definitely be Gothic, actually. Because at that point, 1066 is when the Normans conquer England and they set up their power there. By that point, you already have the Gothic art style, the architectural style that's already been invented, and it's in the process of being perfected at that time period, but it is in existence. Let's see. The Slavonic Flood, Section 2. Subsection 2. Let's see, how long is this part? That's not long. We'll read through. We'll stop here today. Section 3. There, there we are. Highlighted it. Yeah, we'll stop at section 3. Because it doesn't seem like this section is all that long. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 pages about. We can get through that. I think I have enough in the tank. All right. Section 2, the Slavonic Flood. The last great racial movement in Europe, which reached its climax before the end of the Dark Ages, is the expansion of the Slavs. Oh, and yeah, so when he says Dark Ages, he means the time basically before Charlemagne, which I also disagree with. I don't think those were Dark Ages per se, perchance. But that's what he means. He's not talking about the Middle Ages when he says the Dark Ages. The expansion of the Slavs, a process as momentous for the ethnic future of the continent as any previously described, affecting at its greatest extent the whole landmass east of a line drawn roughly from the head of the Adriatic to the mouth of the Elbe. It differs from the invasions and wanderings of other barbarians as an imperceptibly rising tide differs from a headlong cataract or from a winding river with alternating rapids and smooth reaches. The quiet entry of the Slavs onto the stage of European history is unnoticed by contemporary onlookers. It is not a brilliant raid, led by outstanding personalities like those of Goths or Vandals, or a swift rush from Asia like that of the Huns. It is the steady expansion of a peasant race, forming at first the economic substratum of communities led by warrior rulers, Germanic or Asiatic, but increasing in numbers, absorbing its conquerors. Without political cohesion or ambition, transplanted hither and thither from Baltic to Adriatic to serve the purpose of despotic Khagans, a rising tide of population which flows in upon East Germany, down into Greece, and eastwards over the plains of South Russia, when plundering nomads give it a brief respite. Yeah, the Slavs were slaves. That's where we get the word slave, is from Slav. They were used as slaves by the Germans, by the Romans, by the Huns. And yeah, that's where we get the word slave, is from Slav. The mist-hung depths of the Pripyat marshes, where the majority of specialists are at present inclined to place the original Slav home, lay as far outside the vision of Greeks and Romans as the distant Asiatic steppes, where tiny mounted figures and their caravans could dimly be descried moving over a vast expanse of plain. The two pictures are indeed complementary, for the marsh dwellers of Polesi, as this primitive Slav district was known in medieval times, can be regarded as one of those unhappy races, placed on the fringes of the steppe region, whose peaceful pursuits and sedentary life have made them prey of fierce nomadic hordes. Stray references in ancient authors show us a people formed by the silent expanses of reedy swamp and still meres, isolated families of fishers and husbandmen, occupying scattered clearings in bogland and forest, a reddish-haired primitive folk, shy traffickers in fur and honey, scantily clad and escaping from their pursuers into the water or neighboring thicket. Masters, too, of a missile and guerrilla warfare, and excellent soldiers when in foreign service. They are a strangely anonymous nation. There is no tradition, no mythological genealogy of these original Slavs. The folklore of later times preserves memories chiefly of outside races who captured the Slav imagination. The terrible Avars figure as giants or monsters, while the Emperor Trajan, conqueror of Dacia, Transylvania, and Romania, in the 2nd century AD, becomes in Balkan legend the great Tsar Trojan, for whom burning gold and pure silver flow from 70 wells. It is clear from this and other evidence that the Slavs had already begun to outflow their primitive area before the 1st centuries AD, percolating southward to the Danube by either extremity of the Carpathians, westward over the plains that lie between Elbe and Vistula, and eastward toward the Volga basin and the Sea of Azov. The central position of their home, situated on the isthmus, as it were, of the European peninsula, formed by the great waterways of western Russia, exposed them to the two extreme cultural influences on the Baltic and the Black Sea, while racial admixture of Teutonic blood on one side and Asiatic stocks on the other helped to accentuate the differences which were later to divide and distinguish the various Slavonic nationalities. Unnoticed by the annalists, the rising flood continued. Shortly before the reign of Justinian, Byzantium awoke to the existence of a Slav menace. All through the 6th century, the Slav raids grew in intensity, devastating the districts of Thrace, Thessaly, and Macedonia, penetrating the elaborate lines of castles devised by Justinian to protect the Danube and the vital roads that joined the eastern and western parts of his empire. Excuse me. A cyclonic storm center had established itself over Hungary in the shape of the Avars, lashing the waves of the Slavonic tide into furious currents, imparting to them a new and terrible driving force and scattering them in spray far over Central Europe. From this time may be dated the Slavization of Greece and the territorial sundering of Old and New Rome. After 600, despite the valiant counterattacks of Byzantine generals, the Danube frontier and the empire ceased to have any practical existence. The Slavs took Greece from the Romans, Isidore of Seville, a contemporary chronicler, notes tersely. Yeah, contemporary chronicler. Very important contemporary chronicler. Believe he's also a saint. I know there's Saint Isidore the Farmer. I think so there's a Saint Isidore the Farmer. Yeah, he's a saint. Saint Isidore of Seville. In You'll never guess where he was a bishop of. Isidore the Younger, Isidore Jr. Neat. Yeah. Yeah, he's a saint. Saint Isidore. I had seemed to remember that Isidore was a saint. All right. The Roman and Greek-speaking populace were driven to the Adriatic and Aegean fringes of the peninsula. The great trading city of Salonika, protected by her massive walls and siege engines, and by the strong arm of St. Demetrius, her tutelary saint, withstood the assault, but the surrounding district of Macedonia was permanently occupied by the Slavs. Footnote: by the 7th century AD, this region was so thickly populated by Slavs that it became known as Sclavenia, also known today as Slovenia. At least I'm pretty sure that's where Slovenia is. Google Earth. Let's go. Excuse me. All right. At least I think it's Slovenia. Looks like I'm wrong. Where's Slovenia? There's Slovakia. Ah, Slovenia's over here. My bad. I'm wrong. I don't know geography. I do. Somewhat. Not terrible. Yeah, here's North Macedonia. Slovenia. Slovenia is an interesting... Slovenia. Slovenia mod for Mountain Blade Warband. Interesting. If I played Mountain Blade, I might be interested. But here's Kosovo. Kosovo's right next to Serbia. I think I knew that. I know geography somewhat. I know where some of these countries are. Yeah, here's Switzerland. Yeah, everybody knows where Switzerland is. I've been to Luxembourg. I've been to the airport in Luxembourg. Let's see. I wonder if I can find it. Let's see. Kreutzwald. I've been here. Right on the border. Very nice town. Also in the Alsace-Lorraine region. Let's see, I wonder if I can find where I stayed. It was an actual manor. It's very close to the border. No. Yeah, it was like right on the border. I don't remember exactly where. Deutschland. Even in these small towns, a lot of oh, was it this? Was it here? This might have been it. Yeah, or I'm wasting your time, but yeah, I think this is it. I think this was where I stayed when I was in Kreutzwald. Could be wrong though. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful little area. We went to Germany pretty much every day for. We went to Mass in Germany a couple times. I forget where in Germany. But we went to Germany a good bit. We went to Strasbourg. The two cathedrals I saw when I was in Europe were Strasbourg and Metz. Metz is an interesting cathedral. It's yellow. It has a yellowish hue to it. Cuz that's the color of the stone in the area. It's kind of a yellowish. But back to the Slavs. The flood poured down into the peninsula and even reached the Aegean Islands. But the coastal cities of southern Greece and the Peloponnese remained centers of Hellenic life and culture, ready to take part in the Byzantine reconquest 3 centuries later. Far on the west, the population of Roman Salona, capital of Dalmatia, streamed down the hillside from their ravaged city and sought refuge within the walls of Diocletian's huge palace at Spalato. Others fled to the Adriatic islands and inlets, forming a fringe of Latinity which persisted until recent times. Only in 1898 died the last speaker of the mysterious language, a debased descendant of the Old Roman tongue. Inland, communities of Latin speech seem to have survived in the former provinces both north and south of the Danube, And to their influence is due the origin of the Romanian language, which is a Latin language. Many don't realize that, but Romanian is a Romance language. You would think it would be easy to guess, but seeing as how it's Romanian, but it's so close to the Slavs and the Baltics that many think that it's not. Or maybe they just don't realize. Or maybe everybody realizes and I'm just assuming nobody realizes. Meanwhile, the Avar tornado, from its center in Hungary, whirled the Slav masses in all directions, dividing tribes and settling fragments of them on distant frontiers, westwards in Carinthia and the Tyrol, northwards along the Elbe and Saal, using their manpower on the circumference of the Avar circle against the troops of Bavarians, Lombards, Saxons, and Franks. The range of the nomad influence, which extended at one time or another from the Peloponnese to the Baltic, can be paralleled by that of the Altaian empires of Asia, and it bears a close resemblance to that of their predecessors in Europe, the Huns. True to its steppe origin, the Avar rule was a plundering tyranny, dependent on brute force, maintained by terrorizing raids, and liable to sudden dissolution. Early in the 7th century, the subject people rose in revolt. A Frankish merchant called Samo organized the Slavs of the main valley against the Avars, and successfully maintained his kingdom against both them and the Franks. The Croats and the Serbs soon followed suit, and finally the Bulgarians on the lower Danube formed an independent kingdom. Apart from the realm of Samo, however, the Avar masters in each district continued to dominate the Slav peasantry until they were merged in the surrounding population, and the medieval organization of these Balkan states shows clear traces of an Asiatic system. A striking instance is Bulgaria, where a western offshoot of the Bulgars, a race akin to the Huns, who are first heard of as settled on the Don, had arrived to the northwestern shores of the Black Sea, above the Danube estuary towards the close of the 5th century. After freeing themselves from the Avar yoke about 640, they crossed the Danube, extending their territory southwards to within 150 miles of the walls of Byzantium, ruling as a warrior caste the Slav agricultural population, and drawing from them the necessary troops for the foundation of a mighty empire, which by the end of the 9th century stretched almost to the Adriatic on the west, and thrust its apex down to the Pindus Mountains on the south. This first Bulgarian empire decided the future history of the Balkans. Had it not been for the fierce Bulgar Khagans and their militant boyars, the Slav immigrants of these parts would hardly have proved capable of offering permanent, organized resistance to the persistent efforts, century after century, of the Roman Empire, with its professional army and skilled tactics, to restore and retain the old frontier line of the Danube and the provinces which lay along its banks, and the glories of medieval Bulgaria, Croatia, and Serbia might never have been called into existence. The weakening of the Avar power, which continued to decline until its final destruction by Charlemagne, produced repercussions on the whole series of Avaro-Slav states. The great westward tide of Slavdom had turned. In Upper Austria it receded as the Germans of Bavaria pushed forward. North of this, a line of more than 30 little Slav tribes stretched from the Danube to Mecklenburg, disunited, living in scattered settlements in swamp and forest. Bohemia, encircled by mountains, became a strong kingdom, but the Elbe Slavs were exterminated or Germanized, and Charlemagne's conquest of Saxony was only the prelude to a further advance of the Western power, a stubborn conquest pursued for many generations. On the Baltic shores, the Vikings of Scandinavia, merchants and pirates, raided the Slav districts and eventually established permanent strongholds. Gradually, they gained possession of the great trade route formed by the Russian network of waterways which links Lake Ladoga to the Euxine, And pushing southwards, they established soon after 800 the dominion of Kiev, the nucleus of the future empire of Russia. All right. Let's see. We made it almost a full 12 pages today. That's pretty good. Pretty good work. Good job, everybody. Give yourself a pat on the back. But I think we're gonna stop here. The Dominion of Kiev, the Empire of Russia. I don't have much to say about that, except Cyril and Methodius were awesome, and they were not iconoclasts. The Byzantines love to claim Cyril and Methodius. The Greek Orthodox love to, but they got their mission from Rome, from the Pope himself. Because they had left Byzantium because of the iconoclastic heresy, and they ended up in Rome, and the Pope gave them the mission of converting the Russians. And so that's why the Cyrillic alphabet is called that, because it was written by Cyril, by Saint Cyril. But we'll stop here. Yeah, this is already so much more interesting than the chapters on Islam. You know, Europe is just so much more interesting. It's like, yeah, you can talk about these sand dwellers all you want, these Arabs. It's not interesting. It's like I just don't care about the Middle East and its history. Persian history is interesting. Persia actually has like a decently a very well established culture, but it's actually a somewhat interesting culture. The Arabians are just not interesting. But the Slavs, that like I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this so much more than the last section. Because like I said, this is just more interesting. It's more interesting to me. It's just more interesting, period. Because it's Europe. Europe is the best. Europe is the greatest. But we'll leave it at that. I won't run my mouth anymore. So you all have a wonderful night. Before we go, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the notification button. Leave a comment. Follow me on Twitter. I don't post there much, but I do post some interesting stuff there. Occasionally. And you have a wonderful night and a great weekend.